Welcome to Telford and Ricky IDT's short cybersecurity session around phishing. This short session is for parents and carers. Let's start with a quick introduction into the importance of cybersecurity. Fact 1. 91% of all cyber attacks start with phishing. So, I'm sure those of you who are listening perhaps have some of experience in phishing, and you yourselves may well have been phished. And as an example, you could have an email which simply says, "Oh, here's the latest offer," or "Have you been locked out of your account?" And there used to be a misconception that all cyber attacks are from this young teenage, boy traditionally who sits in the basement of his mum's house with his hood up, and these are the stereotypes which kind of prevail when we're discussing what a cyber attack is. Actually, that is far from the truth. It doesn't really appeal to hackers nowadays to just go straight in for the hack, especially when it comes to parents and carers. Actually, you can clearly see with 91%, nearly all of them start with phishing. And that's because it's easy to do. You can often get credentials which are make it far quicker to get into the system than it would be actually hacking it with brute force. So when it comes to actually protecting yourself, protecting your child who you're looking after, or children who you're looking after, I think the first port of call is twofold. One, if you have an email, it's keeping yourself safe. But then also, it's if you've got someone you're looking after, it's making sure that they're safe. Fact 2. How many fraudulent emails are sent globally every day? 3.4 billion. That's a hell of a lot when you think actually about the population of the UK, something around 70, 80 million people now, you know, 3.4 billion. That's a lot of emails. And don't forget, these aren't just normal emails, these are fraudulent emails. And if I were to ask you, what do you think that trajectory is for that 3.4 billion? Is it going up or is it going down? I think we're all going to be singing from that same hymn sheet that that 3.4 billion is a figure that is only ever increasing. And we are going to touch upon the reasons why that is shortly. Fact 3. What is the average time a user spends on a phishing email? So you've got this phishing email that's dropped into your inbox. You will spend, on average, under 2 seconds assessing the threat of that email and making that decision as to whether or not you are going to click on it or ignore it. 2 seconds isn't a long time, and by the end of this training session, hopefully, you will realize that actually you need to spend longer on that. And it doesn't mean just looking at it blankly. There is a formula which you'll look at as to how to make sure that every second that you spend on that email is studying whether or not that is a phishing attempt. Fact 4. How much did phishing cost businesses globally last year? Over 12 billion. That's a lot of finances which are being punitively captured, by these criminals, and businesses aren't really prepared still for these cyber attacks that are happening. And don't forget, this is also going to be pertinent to you. Some of you may well have also lost money to phishing attacks, uh, or at least have been lost, time, lost something against them, and that's the truth of it. Phishing attacks are often trying to be disruptive, and it's not necessarily just money, it is also time. Fact 5. Which sector is the number one target attack for phishing? And yes, it is education and schools. Some of you may find that shocking, and one of the reasons why is actually because education in schools is known as the gateway when it comes to phishing attacks. Why would master criminals or government sectors target schools? And that's because actually because they're gatekeepers, have access to a lot of different platforms. For example, when a student is involved in a safeguarding incident, more often than not, the school will record that evidence in a software called CPOMS. Additionally, when you're looking at the register, that's recorded in something called Arbor. You may have communications like Class Dojo or Seesaw, for example. That's also something which is a gateway. And teachers should and are encouraged, especially by our organisation, to have different passwords for all of those. But there are still going to be those teachers, members of staff, could even be the person who cooks the meals, for example. They might have the same password if they've not had strong enough training. And that's where the problem or the concern is, because actually, the moment the phishing individual captures that password, it's obviously then perhaps usable across all the range of platforms, and that's not what we want. And again, making this applicable to you, you may be in that boat whereby you may have one password that you use for the majority of platforms that you use. And actually, if you think about the negatives of that, as we discussed in education, it may well be that they can get access to Netflix. They could get access to Amazon, your email. I mean, perhaps it isn't quite as, catastrophic for you guys as it would be if a school were to go down and thinking about the volume of data. But actually, as I was saying earlier, it's still disrupting you in your daily life. And it's really important to have those different passwords. And, I will come on to what we can do to mitigate that shortly. Fact 6. What percentage of staff will click on a simulated phish? Okay, yeah, 20% on the first try. We at Telford and Wrekin run regular phishing simulations, and our aim is to get that figure as low as possible. And again, thinking about you yourself, actually, if you were to have a phishing email, I wonder what percentage of individuals would click the first time, whether or not you would be in that or not. I know we all like to sit and think, no, I wouldn't do that. But looking at the statistics of it being under 2 seconds, I would probably say that's closer to 50% because how many parents and carers have dedicated cybersecurity training, especially from schools? I would argue minimal, hence why this video has been created by us. And I suppose if it's 20% in education, you perhaps again might closer to the 50% mark. So it's really important that you also keep yourself safe. So this is what an email could look like. And really, I just wanted to go through the key features as to we've had this email, it's come into our system, and first of all, what stands out. So first of all, we have got a strange email address. You can see there this is by someone called Aisha Mansawa, and more importantly, it's not necessarily the name, it's the @ bot. Now, just to add clarity as to why that's there, it's gone are the days now where you used to it's still, cyber criminals still harvest um, email addresses, and what that means is every single person in the world leaves a digital footprint. Every single second that you log onto the internet, you are adding to your digital footprint. Now, we'd like to think our digital footprint is safe and it's secure, but more often than not, it isn't. And what you'll find is when you go onto these on a website and you'll see it says, do you accept all of our cookies, etc. Some of them will collect, as part of that cookie list, your email address. It will then sell it on to the dark web. And what criminals will do is they'll go and visit the dark web and they'll pay money for your email address and perhaps even other things. And that is called harvesting. So when the criminal had harvested your email address, what they used to do was copy and paste and then send an email out, usually by bulk. Nowadays, that doesn't need to happen. Criminals will have something called a bot, and this bot will often either create, as part of the package of this email, or the very minimum, it will just send them out to millions upon millions of individuals. So if you do see something that's got bot, then that should cause alarms because that means it's usually from a bot that's sending you spam, and in this instance, spam is also phishing. The strange email address is also important, and I'll come on to that very quickly. Poor grammar. So you'll see here, you've got a lovely word to, and that's underlined in blue, and that isn't quite right. It doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound like it's actually sent from someone who is fluent in English, or at the very minimum, it doesn't sound like I'm expecting it. You'll also notice some generic terms, for example, dollars. If interested, kindly contact Dr. Thomas Nicholas via blah 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 blah, and you can see that we're getting paid £500 in dollars. Well, as you know, we're in England, we use pounds. This doesn't look legitimate. Now, when I said earlier about the strange email address, this is where I said I'm going to come back to it. Am I expecting this? Fine. Okay, Aisha Mansour could be a real person, but am I really expecting this email from this individual? Have I been speaking to them? Probably not, in which case it doesn't really matter who it's from. If I'm not expecting this email, then really that should be regarded as being suspicious. There's also a strange disclaimer at the bottom. Now, first of all, if you're expecting it from an individual who is a personal, friend or an acquaintance, you don't really get disclaimers. If, however, this is a business email, you may well get a disclaimer. But if you study the disclaimer in more detail, first of all, you'll notice it's mentioning the Bank of Tanzania. For those who don't know, we certainly shouldn't be expecting an email from the Bank of Tanzania. And it's also, again, highly suspicious with highlighting that link at the bottom again, bot to go email disclaimer ASP. It just looks very suspicious. If we now have a look at the next example, this is perhaps more pertinent to you than the rest of the examples. Here is a Netflix email supposedly from them where it's saying that my account is on hold. Please update your payment details. Well, first of all, you'll notice that you've got that lovely big red box at the bottom. Now, what they're hoping that you do is to click that red box. So I want to be quite clear. I'm just going to ask you a question, take a moment to think about it and reflect. I click the red box and it's asking me to provide my bank details. I've suddenly realised, oh, this is a scam, but I'm not going to fall for it, and I close it. Is there a problem with what you've done? The answer is yes. By clicking that link, you may well have already given them a way in. That link could have held a virus, for example. One virus which could cause a load of damage is something called keylogger or keystrokes. And what that does is basically it uploads itself onto your computer and allows it. Well, basically what it does is it looks at all of the information that you're typing, every key that you press, and it sends it off to the criminals. So although you've not given them the password, the next time you log into Netflix, they've recorded what your password, actually is. And safe to say that could stay on there for months and months and months. Think about all the websites you visit, perhaps your bank, that the information could be stored on. So when it comes to clicking links, that's a real threat, equally as much as typing in your information. Doesn't matter if it's just a link or a box. If you're not expecting the email, don't click anything. Instead, try to think about a way that you can find out the same information without interacting at all with this email. For example, on your phone, or alternatively on your TV, have you visited Netflix? Have you actually checked via Netflix, again, not by clicking anything on that email, whether or not the claim is true? Have you checked with your bank account to see whether or not any payments have been missed? If it's asking for something, the first thing you do is start to be curious. Am I expecting this? Is this legitimate? And if there's any doubt, check via a different way. You may have another email like this. Now, this is usually for teachers, for example. However, it's equally as important to you. You could get email verification. You need to check and make sure that your account is in good order, otherwise, it's going to get closed down. First of all, no company, especially Office 365, they're not going to email you like this. It also sounds urgent and threatening, and that is the biggest challenge that individuals face when it comes to phishing. They will make it sound urgent and threatening. If you don't do this within 24 hours, you're going to be locked out of your account. Because what they're banking on is that you stress about it, and then you spend less than 2 seconds, referring to that fact earlier, on the email. They're hoping you make a split, rash decision that gives them the keys to the castle, so to speak. And again, you'll notice perhaps that there's poor grammar. Now, if you have a look a bit further down, you'll notice it says the word login. Now, we've tried to make this a bit obvious. If you hover over that link, you'll notice that it goes to a Microsoft Forms page. First of all, there is absolutely no way in which Microsoft or any formal company are going to send you to Office pages when it comes to the forms. They're just not. They will use a secure link that doesn't revolve around a Microsoft package, basically. And again, I've not clicked that to find out. I've hovered over that login link, and a little box will come up and it tells me this is a Microsoft Forms page. This is where I'm going. And actually, I know now to avoid that. I know that that is probably most likely a scam. And that works for boxes too. So in the earlier example, when we go back to this red box, if I hover over that red box, it'll come up with the same box, which will then say, I'm now going to take you to Microsoft Forms. And again, I know not to click on that. So again, before don't click, hover over, and then have a look and say, where is this wanting to take me? Now, when I said earlier that when it comes to grammar, it's important, it is. However, it's less important now than ever before. The reasons why is, of course, AI. Gone are the days where a person in a different country or even this country would sit and type out that email, because AI can do it for us. And actually, it can usually speak with better grammar and conversationalist language than ever we can. So nowadays, grammar can, be a tool to look at, and you can say, well, actually, this has got poor grammar. But realistically, it isn't the only thing that we should be looking at, and it certainly isn't the most important. And there's a little quote there which I just want to read out. We must stop looking for spelling mistakes and start looking for unusual intent, unexpected requests, and suspicious links. Gone are the days where we will look at that email and say, oh, that looks a bit dodgy, because actually it's becoming harder and harder to identify what is a dodgy email and what isn't. And instead, we need to look behind the intent. Why is somebody sending me this? Am I expecting this? What happens if I click on this link and type in my credentials? How can I find out if this is legitimate? We're asking more questions now as to the why and to the how, to make sure that we're making that right decision. So, what happens if you have clicked the link and typed in the information? I've already said some of what's on this page, but it's just to make sure we're crystal clear. First of all, leave your PC alone. However, before you do that, you do need to turn off your Wi-Fi. You can do this quite easily just by enabling airplane mode. Equally so, same with your phone. Switch your device off completely. Simple as that. You then can leave it alone. You do not need to preserve the device for forensic investigation unless otherwise advised. Your main priority is stopping the malware from downloading or from spreading. When you've been advised to do so, you can run a full antivirus scan, but what's really important is using a separate device to change your key passwords. If banking is involved, call 159 immediately. Again, if you do this sooner, the better the chances of making sure that money is retrieved. Forward and send all scam emails to report@phishing.gov.uk, or you can text 7726. And again, the action fraud.police.uk is below. So to conclude, I'd like to conclude with two quotes. The first is that amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. This is also linked directly to the quote below. Schools and companies spend millions on firewalls and secure access, and it is money wasted because it doesn't address the weakest link in the security chain, the people. You are that weakest link, and that's because, unlike a computer system, you have emotions, you have feelings, you have fear. You get scared, and as we said earlier, you click. So it's really important that you do not become that weakest link. You, because you've had this training and you're going to spend time thinking about what happens if you do get an email, that you become a strength, not someone who clicks eagerly and gives that information away. We're pausing and we know that we're doing the right course of action when things are going wrong. So, to summarise, within this session we focused on the best practice in identifying phishing attacks, and hopefully you leave with a greater knowledge on how to identify them, the steps in reporting them, and the steps of what to do if you fall victim. If you have any other questions, feel free to speak to your school, and we can obviously then address any problems or questions or queries that you've got. Otherwise, thank you, and thank you for your attention and your participation.